So I began an investigation of that and made a documentary called Vaxxed, which I think a lot of people credit with igniting the medical freedom movement around the world. We've sold out audiences, had bomb threats in theaters. It was the most controversial film. We got kicked out of Tribeca Film Festival. But that catapulted me into the center of this discussion about vaccines. The film was only about one vaccine, the MMR vaccine, and a fraudulent autism study that the CDC did. But as I toured the country with the film, all these parents were coming up every single night. In fact, I would say in a Q&A, I would say to the audience, would everyone with a vaccine-injured child please stand up? Because I wanted to know what audience was coming to see this film, and 3/4 of the room would stand up 5 shows a day, every single day for an entire year. And I realized this isn't just a small issue. There's an ocean of vaccine injury that's going on that no one's talking about. So that's when I started my nonprofit. Many people would say, well, your film's about the MMR vaccine, what about the rest of the vaccines? And I didn't have an answer to that, so I decided I would start a nonprofit. I'm a journalist. I'm going to investigate every single vaccine that's ever been made. And so I put a team of scientists together. I brought in one of the greatest constitutional attorneys of all times named Aaron Siri, because vaccines are protected from liability by the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. It's about the only product like it in America. It can kill you, can injure you, and you cannot sue the doctor, you cannot sue the manufacturer. Everyone is indemnified. So in order to get to the bottom of the story, you can't get a lawsuit. You cannot get discovery. You can't see the emails. You don't know what we know when Pfizer lies about a product that kills people and they pay out billions of dollars. We know when their drugs do. We saw Johnson & Johnson lied about talcum powder that it actually causes, ovarian cancer. We saw Fen-Phen. We see these drugs get pulled because you can sue them, but you cannot sue the vaccine maker.
So I'm going to interject in here just for one second, because some of the information he's throwing out there maybe needs a little bit of context. When we're talking about mRNA, which has been used in the vaccines, which was most recently, you would probably have heard the word from the COVID vaccine when COVID was going on in 2020 and 2021. What that basically means was the mRNA vaccine was basically supposed to be a blueprint that was given to your cells to be able to build immunity against the body, but it ended up taking what was known as a spike protein from the actual virus itself. And it seems like one of the problems that we're having, and we had Dr. Peter McCullough actually talk to us a little bit about this, was that spike protein, even when you take the vaccine, whether it's healthy or not is not even going to be my argument, but that spike protein still stays in your body and doesn't leave it years later on. So with that sort of context going in, I want you to sort of lay a little bit more of a ground rule for me, for the audience to get to know you. It sounds like you really started out in television, and now you've ended up where you are right now.
Yeah, I'm a journalist. And so, I guess to finish the story, as I started doing that investigation, I ended up speaking on the same stages as Robert Kennedy Jr. And it was clear that he was seeing the same things that I was, and we were both being attacked by everyone in media because the pharmaceutical industry owns your television set. If you just watch your commercials when you're watching the news, 50 to 70% of it's pharma. So if you think you're getting the truth about drugs and pharmaceutical products, you should know that that news anchor doesn't work for Fox. They don't work for CBS. They work for Merck. They work for Pfizer. And I used to work for them too when I worked at CBS. So you could get an mRNA, you can get any of these technologies, but while we're here talking about God and we're talking about how we're created, we're a long way away from living in a world where we believe that we were created in the image and likeness of God.
Amen.
We are being born into an original sin that the pharmaceutical industry has put upon us that says that your baby is not born in the image and likeness of God. It's dirty. It needs to be vaccinated on the first day of life with a sexually transmitted disease called hepatitis B. And we're going to call the Child Protective Services and take you away or take your child away if you do not infect them with a sexually transmitted disease in the first day of life. And that's where this insanity begins. And then we watch doctors playing God, injecting our children with bacteria and viruses, heavy metals, aluminum, formaldehyde, the worst concoctions. And here's what I can tell you. In my investigations, not a single childhood vaccine that we've injected into our children ever went through a double-blind placebo trial prior to licensure. Not one. I've won in court. I beat the government on it. I've won against the NIH, the CDC, the FDA, HHS. So that's what's going on now. Robert Kennedy Jr. Kennedy Jr. has been yelled at by every television agency in the world because they're owned by pharma. But you finally have someone in office that feels that he's guided by God, that is going to finally do the science that you've deserved for decades. And the pharmaceutical industry and the food industries are terrified because we're about to know how bad the science is around these issues. And by the way, when we had 10 vaccines in the 1980s, which most of us as parents grew up with, we had a chronic illness rate of 12%. Now that our children are getting over 72 vaccines now, by the time they're 18, we have gone from 12% chronic illness to 60%. In 40 years, that is the greatest decline in public health that has ever been recorded. And people say to me, how do you know it's the vaccines? How do you know it's not like the pesticides and herbicides sprayed all over our vegetables, or the fluoride in our water, or the hormones in our beef? And I would say, I sue on all those things. My nonprofit looks at all those things, and so does Robert Kennedy Jr. But here's one thing that's for sure. It's going to be one of those products because it is definitely a toxic load that is making us this sick. It is definitely an environmental issue, and our regulatory agencies have approved every single one of those products and said they're safe. So whatever it ends up being when this study is finally done, it is on the back of our NIH, our CDC, our FDA, our HHS that has not been doing the will of the people as they were mandated to do. They've been fighting for the industries against us, and that is changing right now with MAHA.
So I want to ask a question before we bring out our first person in our panel. Can I see a show of hands of people in the audience that know somebody with autism? I don't even know how to say. That must be what, 70, 80%?
That's what it felt like when I said I felt the oxygen just get sucked out of the room. That's something that, when, as Robert Kennedy Jr. said, if you'd have asked that to anyone in this room that's anywhere near 60 or 70, back when they were 20, if you asked that, not a single hand would have gone up. So we have gone from 1 in 10,000 to we are now 1 in 34 children being diagnosed with autism in America. It's more prevalent in boys, which means boys, it's somewhere around 1 in 18 to 1 in 22. We are getting dangerously close to not being able to stand a mountain army. 77% of our children are so sick they cannot qualify for the military. America is on the brink of total, complete disaster. But we can change it. I mean, the beauty is, all it is, it's not genetic. Genetics don't change over 40 years. It's not the way this works. All we have to do is get these toxins out of our environment, out of our food, minimize the amount we're injecting into our children, and I think you're going to see the rise of America back to its greatness.
And with that, we're going to invite our first doctor out. Please welcome Dr. James Markham with over 34 years in experience in cardiology. You've had him on some of our panels before. Please, Dr. James Markham. All right, so let's just start this panel off. Dr. Markham, how do we as Christians, with all the knowledge that of cardiovascular disease and heart problems and everything going on in America today, how do we respond to all that in light of our scriptural beliefs in Genesis to respond to the heartache that we see going across America today?
Victor, that was a big question.
That was a big question.
Well, I think we have to see the big picture. Okay, the big picture, what's going on. And the big picture, in my opinion, I take care of people with needs. So we have to meet needs first. Meet their needs, love them, not judge them. And the next thing we have to do, we have to bring out truth. Truth is important, it doesn't go away. We can't ignore truth. And we have to turn people to the source of truth. And you talked about it already, it's not necessarily science. It's the Bible. We have to get people back to the Bible, and the core that I think is we need to get people back to worship, where we can have transformation of hearts, where we can have transformation of our epigenetics, where we can start doing things for the right reasons. And I see this in cardiovascular disease all the time. Heart attacks are coming at a younger age. We have more hypertension, more diabetes. Our generation is sicker than ever. And as they get sicker, they can't think, they can't make good decisions.
And if I recall the studies, right now in America, about 40% of the population is obese. That's over 100 million adults.
Yes.
And that affects so much, not even talking about getting into the food that we're pumping into our body, whether it's Rentai 40, high fructose corn syrup. I remember going to Samoa about over a decade ago, not American Samoa, but the actual Samoa, and seeing pictures of their grandparents' generation, how they were slim and fit. And once they imported the Western diet, McDonald's and everything like that, they are really big. You think they're football players, but really, they're actually really slim. And in America Samoa, they actually have the highest rate of diabetes at a whopping 70% because of the westernized diet. Del, I want to bring you in for a second because Dr. James actually brought up something very important about truth. And in your, I don't want to say so much fights, but in your dialogues and your life, has truth been thrown under the bus in the medical pharmaceutical world to a degree that many Americans just haven't realized?
I think, yeah, we would have to redefine truth if we're going to talk about what the pharmaceutical industry has been delivering, right? We've lost the scientific method. The truth around science is that...
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, we've lost the scientific method. The scientific method demands that if I have a hypothesis, or let's say I create a new product, a new drug, then what we want is a skeptical scientist or doctor to say, I think that drug's dangerous, or I think that a hypothesis is incorrect. I'm going to challenge it with everything I have. Think of it as a car crash, right? We don't want Elon Musk being the one that does his own crash tests on his own cars and then says to America, I have the safest car there is. You want someone that wants to try to destroy that car, prove that it can't survive the crash test, hit it in every way that it can. And then, if it comes out and it is, is 5-star spectacular, you've proved it's safe, because you challenged it every way you could. Instead, science has scrapped any challenge. If you watch COVID, every single doctor, including Dr. Robert Malone, who invented the vaccine, was censored and shut down for challenging the safety of that product. Right now, Robert Kennedy Jr., if you watched him during the Senate hearings and the confirmation hearings, you had Senator Cassidy say right now you won't do a study on vaccines looking at autism. Like, why would you say that? Why would you not put it all on the table? They've all admitted, everyone in the Senate admitted, we have the sickest nation of children we've ever seen, but they all want to carve out for their corporate sponsors, let's make sure that we don't get too aggressive on the vaccines. Let's not get too aggressive on fluoride. You can't be telling me that, EMFs really are that. And so this is why we're here. We're here because special interests that are funding all of our studies are doing we want a result, and we build the science to do that result. One of the things that Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to do is they cherry pick the studies you get to see. A pharmaceutical industry or a new company will do 5 studies. 3 of them will show that the product doesn't work at all. It's a total failure, and they throw those in the garbage, and you only see the one that they got the result they wanted. He's saying, in the new administration, we're going to see every single study, even the ones that failed, and we're going to know the truth.
I want to pivot back to Dr. James Markham. With your 34 years of experience in cardiology, what is the number one problem that Americans are being hit on when it comes to their hearts?
Well, we have so many. It's not just one, it's everything. From obesity to diabetes to any type of stress on the body raises a chance of us developing heart disease. But getting back to what he said, I want to let us, we talk about science. I want us to start with the Bible as a source of science. That's our test on all science. We depend on that first. And the Bible is so far ahead of science. We use Bible first, and we judge science by the truths in the Bible. If we don't have truth, where are we ever going to go with this? We're just going to spin our wheels over and over. But, we talk about all these problems we have. We know where the answer is, in all thy ways acknowledge him. He's going to direct our paths, our nation's paths. We have to start looking towards God for the answers because he's our creator. So I'm getting back to we need to worship the creator, find the source of truth, and slowly work through this based on how God's leading each one of us each day by day, moment by moment. But we have a huge problem in cardiovascular disease. If we don't get control of this, we're going to spend all of our money on cardiovascular disease. Del, correct me if I'm wrong here, but last year $4.5 trillion was spent on healthcare.
Yeah.
That's 90% on chronic disease, about 17% of the GDP.
Yeah, more than we spend on the military.
And we're not solving any problems, and it's going to go up because this generation is sicker. We talked about that over and over.
Yeah.
So where's our true solution here?
So it sounds like what I'm hearing is from the religious perspective, we have to have that baseline of truth, and from the scientific perspective, we need to get back to the fundamentals. So we have faith and science sort of need to be combined here to have that baseline, because without that baseline of truth, without knowing the reason, the cause, and the purpose of what we're doing here, we are spinning our wheels in thin air. Go ahead, Del. Looks like you have something
I
you
want
want
to
to say.
say that I think that there's a danger in the way we're having this conversation right now, because science set out because we feared God. We had to have faith, and we want to have something we could prove.
True, like Sir Isaac
so
Newton
science is
himself.
supposed to be the part of the world that you could prove. I will tell you, it is the most bogus religion that ever existed now. It's not science. We've got to watch, because right now someone's going to take this video and say, oh my God, they were saying you should be religious over being scientific. No. I will tell you that science is based completely on assumptions now. If you never did a double-blind trial on any of the vaccines but said it was safe, then you have a faith-based religion. You just started right there. And so I'm supposed to have faith that I'm supposed to inject a sexually transmitted disease into my day 1-old baby, and I'm trusting that my doctor did the study and recognizes that it has 10 times the amount of aluminum ever approved to be injected into a human body, into a full-grown body, not just a 10-pound baby. I have to have faith that all of these vaccines were studied all together, that they actually make us healthier. That study's never been done. I have to have faith that everybody's investigated, that the FDA, the NIH were actually challenging these studies. I have to have faith that all of this, that everyone that's being elected and everyone that's working for me is out for my own good and not for the good of the pharmaceutical industry or of the fluoride industry or of the food industry. If I have to have that much faith, let's call that what it is.
Yeah.
They've got their own religion.
I agree with you.
So with
It's
that
about
in mind,
faith. It's about faith, y'all. Where's our faith at, Victor?
exactly.
That's
and
where
you
we're
know
going
what?
to put our faith.
This is, I want you to have the final word before you end up taking this panel for the next person, but here at the Battle for Your Frontal Lobe, these are the discussions that actually have to happen. Even if they seem a little contentious, even if they seem a little strong, even if it gets cut up by the press, the reality is, without these conversations, America cannot move forward. Dr. James Markham, any final words that you want to say here?
What are we going to do about it? We have the challenge, we have the gauntlet. What are we going to do about this? We're going to pray. We're going to turn to the source of truth. We're going to question science, or quote science, and we're going to let the Bible speak for itself, and we're going to worship the Creator.
There you go. Thank you so much, Dr. James Malcolm. We will now bring out our next panelists. And we're now going to introduce to our panel, we're bringing on, somebody has spoken already, Dr. John Kelly. He has dual degrees from Loma Linda University with his MD residency in preventative medicine back in 2003, specializing in type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and related to chronic diseases. He's the head of many lifestyle and medical director programs in Virginia, Maryland, Michigan, and South Dakota. Please, Dr. John Kelly, come on out. So Dr. Kelly, let's take a step back for a moment. We have many wonderful, faithful Christians here. I guarantee we have people here that are not Christians that are watching. What do you think, from our perspective, is the number one thing we can promote for a healthy lifestyle from the Bible?
Well, I love the question because I do believe that the Bible, properly studied and understood, has answers that we little realize and appreciate. I know from my own work in lifestyle medicine as an intensive interventionist, the modalities that I use come from inspiration. And so, and the science, I'm an epidemiologist, I've done the studies to show that they work. I shared that the other day. But I think I want to say something that I believe is a big problem with using truly evidence-based modalities, because as I was listening to the previous interview, and a lot of people are not aware that the top editors of leading medical journals have stated and shown that many of the modern studies being published are not actually credible. They are crooked or misdirected on purpose.
Could you repeat that one more time for everybody to hear?
So what I'm saying is that the top managing editors of serious, credible medical journals have published and are saying now in the literature that they no longer can have confidence in the published studies, especially on pharmaceuticals. There's a doctor in England who's got a video out, it's a documentary, First Do No Farm, PHARM.
Yeah.
And
Dr.
I don't-
Steve Malhotra.
Okay, I didn't have his permission, so I didn't use his name. But
I'm
yes.
sure he would want the permission.
And I just want to say that as a lifestyle medicine leader, this is a big problem because many patients are getting treatments for diseases that the research shows lifestyle is the most effective treatment, but instead they're not even getting informed consent. They're doing procedures and starting medications on people that really should have an opportunity to make an intensive lifestyle change. So I'm hoping that the Make America Healthy Again movement will bring attention to this fact and change it.
Well,
In that case,
let
go
me
ahead,
address that because you're right. What they found, they've done investigations into the major medical journals, and the statement they've made that more than 50% of the trials and studies that are being reported there are not reproducible. The science does not stand up when they try to reproduce.
Now, just for the layman, can
Yeah.
you break that down? What it means by it is not
Science
reproducible?
only matters. It's sort of like if you watch, is it like a land speed race? You got to do it twice. You can't have the fastest car in the world do it once. You have to prove that you can do it twice in a row. Then it stands. That stands. Same thing with science. You can't just have an anomaly. You've got to prove you can do it twice. And a lot of times, the two different scientific bodies, if they do the science the same way, would come up with the same result. So more than half of the published science in America and around the world cannot be reproduced. So there's huge conversations about, the fact that we're taking drugs and, Alzheimer's right now, the entire concept of Alzheimer's, we were studying the wrong part of the brain. All of these things are starting to come out because the science has been wrong from the beginning. The reason for that is these journals that are being used are being funded by the pharmaceutical industry. And so you'll see that a paper got retracted. It got retracted because the pharmaceutical industry gets upset about the trial of the study and the way that it was done. So what has Robert Kennedy Jr. has done is put Dr. Jay Bhattacharya.
And may I interject just for 1 second? For those people that don't know, Dr. Ray Bhattacharya was one of the people that signed the Great Barrington Declaration.
That's
Full
right.
disclosure, at one of our events, we had Dr. Martin Kordoff here. He addressed us.
Yep.
Basically, they were right.
They're
in
right.
terms of many things that happened during the pandemic, is now the head of NIH. Go ahead, continue, and then we'll
They
jump to
basically
Dr.
said
Kennedy.
that we should not lock down, we should not shut down our schools, we should not shut down our businesses, that it will do more harm than good. All science, all the numbers, all the math, all of the suicides, all of the drug abuse, all the things that skyrocketed proved that they were right. But we want to talk about, we're in a God moment. There is something really spectacular happening in this moment, because when Jay Bhattacharya signed the Great Barrington Declaration, the head of the NIH at that time was Francis Collins, and he wrote an email to Tony Fauci that said, we must shut this down and destroy these people and their conversation right where they stand. He no longer has that job. The guy that signed the Great Barrington Declaration is now the head of the NIH.
So now I'm going to pivot back to Dr. John Kelly. Go ahead.
I just want to say that I'm also one of the signers. Of course, it's much more.
There you
important.
go.
Thank you.
But I mean,
No, that needs an applause right there, please.
Yeah,
Please.
that's huge.
It actually takes a lot of guts to step out, I'm going to say in faith, to go against the grains of sand. Go ahead.
yeah. But what I just wanted to, I appreciate what you're bringing out, and I think that, I was taught in one of the best medical schools in the country, and we were taught that we should use evidence-based medicine, and I totally agree with that, except there's one issue, and that is when the evidence is fake or is false or is misrepresented, then you can't practice evidence-based medicine following the published literature. And so, we have published studies showing, for example, that there's better results with non-emergent coronary artery disease with lifestyle intervention than with stents or medications. The half-life of a stent is about 6 months. Wow. That should be 6 months used to make lifestyle change. Yeah. And I've had patients that come to me and for lifestyle change, and I say, how did you find out about us? I was hoping it was going to be that their doctor told them. They said, oh no, I've got already 2 stents, but one of my friends told me lifestyle. And so they never heard about the evidence. Because, see, there's who's incentivized to publish and make a big deal about lifestyle change?
This is actually very important. Incentivization, the money. It's very hard to end up doing this. I want to ask a question to both of you real quick before we end up having our good doctor leave. In your humble opinion, when did the papers and the science begin to go wrong in America? Let's start with Del, and then we'll finish with Dr. John Kelly.
I think your problem with science is it starts with the papers, but it also happens with the universities. You only get funding, you only get grants, you only get moved forward if you prove you're right. And so it's like anyone, if you're left in your own little laboratory, they start hiding everything under the bed that's not working so that they can get their next grant. Or they get, peer review, and they fake the peer review so that they get their study published. And so all of it is now based on fraud. It's a giant, massive fraud empire that's based on success, usually around getting funding, and that funding is corrupted the entire system, which is why Jay Bhattacharya, just to finish that point, is going to start a medical journal out of the NIH that no pharma funding will be allowed, no outside corporate. So these are the types of changes that need to happen.
So one quick little tie-in I want to make with that. That also sounds like what is happening in the media field, where investigative journalism costs so much money. A lot of big industrial giants in the media end up cutting investigative journalism. So it sounds like that sort of has happened too, and there's almost a connection there too. However, let me just jump over to John because his time is running out.
Let me just say,
Go ahead.
investigative journalism can't afford doing investigations because no one's watching it anymore.
That's the problem.
We all know they're lying to us, and so they can't afford it. Everyone's going to podcasts and new media because we are doing those investigations.
John, I want you to finish off. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to say I don't know when, based on the evidence, because I haven't studied it, can't give you a date, but I can tell you this, that when the change happened was when we started focusing more on the money and on the prestige than on the evidence. If we have people doing research whose real motive was to find the truth about what was the best way to treat disease, we would have different kinds of publications.
I'll go back a little bit further. We started running into trouble the moment we locked Galileo in his house for saying that the Earth is in the center of the universe.
Snap.
I'm serious.
I'm not even saying no.
The one thing I learned in working on the Doctor's television show was that the slowest moving thing in the world is actually the evolution of science and medicine. And the best scientists and doctors, I got to scrub into surgeries. I watched doctors that performed miracles. And the more miraculous the doctor or the scientist, I watched tumors removed from the 13-year-old's brain without ever touching her brain matter, and 5 hours later, she was dancing, her vision came back. It was a miracle. That scientist and that doctor was under review for his license because none of the other brain surgeons around him wanted him to be allowed to do what he was doing. Every single doctor that's truly advancing science and doing something spectacular, like those that signed the Great Barrington Declaration, they're under threat by their own peers, by the system, by the drug companies. So medicine is not advancing, it's being held back, and we're in the dark ages because Galileo is still locked in his house.
Final word to Dr. John Kelly, and then we have to go to the next person.
I want to say this. I don't know if it started with Galileo. I appreciate that, but I will say this. The malpractice, the standard for being guilty of malpractice, if you're a physician, is if they show that what you did was not what an ordinary doctor would do under those circumstances. So there's a lot of truth to what he's saying because everyone is afraid to do something different. I know when I started practicing lifestyle medicine 25 years ago, I was keeping track of every article I had to show that what I was doing was evidence-based, prepared for a malpractice suit, which thank God never has come.
There you go. Thank you so much, Dr. John Kelly. All the best to you. We're now going to bring out our next doctor. We have Dr. Tim Reisenberger, emergency medicine physician, medical degree from Loma Linda University, and master's in public health administration. All right, so Dr. Tim, my goodness, we've already gone through so much information. In your humble opinion, and I'm going to sort of phrase this back because I really want to tie it back to spirituality because this is a religious conference, whether we like it or not, and I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. He is my Savior that died for my sins and rose the third day. Talk to me about what are you seeing going on in America and how can we help the rot that is going on spiritually?
I think really the main problem that we're undergoing is that we're afraid, I think, to even talk about God because of the cancel culture, things like that. When I was in high school, we had, during our graduation, we were asked several different questions. Where are you going to go to college? What did you enjoy most? But one question was, who do you attribute most for your success? And most people said their mom, their dad, my uncle, my grandma who raised me, or something like that. But I thought about this for a long time, and I prayed about it, and I was impressed to give a different answer. And I can tell you, a pin could have dropped in that public high school, because I said the person I attribute most was my Lord Jesus Christ. The principal didn't even hardly read it. He paused for what seemed like an eternity, and he finally said it. But now, many years have gone by, and I might even have my graduation certificate revoked for saying something like that. I think that in our attempt to keep church and state apart, we're afraid to share what our distinctive nation was founded on. It was founded on Christian principles. The fact that all religions have freedom in our country is because we are a Christian nation. In other countries where the dominant religion is something other than Christian, you will die for doing certain things. It's illegal to share your faith in the largest Muslim country in the world. Did you know that? It's illegal. You can go to jail.
And is that Myanmar, Pakistan, or?
Indonesia is actually the largest country.
I was off.
Yes. So I think that if we're open to share biblical principles, not just for society, but for health, we'd be a lot better off. I had a Christian club at my high school. We were allowed to have that. I was very thankful. But I think that we have to share these things intelligently. We want to be fair to others. We want to be honest. But we also want to share what our country was founded on, and what truly makes America great is religious and civil liberties. That is the thing that makes our country great.
That is a wonderful thing to say. I want to go back over to Del Bigtree. It looks like you have something you want to jump in on.
I would say that I think the problem is the dominant religion in America is medicine and pharma. It's not Christianity. You give a person a cancer diagnosis and they forget about God and everything, and they ask that doctor what they're doing next. How many people go and pray? How many people actually say, wait a minute, how do I, God, what am I supposed to do here? How do I heal? When we watched COVID, what did we do? We watched them shut down our churches, and there was very few churches that stood up against that.
True.
So we said that the religion of medicine gets to outweigh our religion and our church and our right to give at each other.
Absolutely.
And then those that stayed open carried a mask law that allowed us all to believe, of all things, that the air that God created is somehow dangerous to me, and they made us wear masks. They made us avoid each other. They didn't let us go to work. They didn't let us exercise. They didn't let us have a life. They didn't let us get to live our God-given life. We were not in our bodies as Christians. We were not seeing that we were created in the likeness, image, and likeness of God. And to this day, every time you turn on your television set, the religion of fear, that you've got to be worried about a measles virus in Texas that's going to kill all of us, even though none of us live on this planet without the fact that all of our grandparents had the measles and did just fine. I want to make that clear. If it's deadly, no one should be sitting in front of me right now.
That's a very interesting point. I remember that it was Jane Tapper on the news media that when COVID started to spread, he said, you should be afraid. But in Christianity, Tim, we are told to fear not.
True.
Why?
I think because we don't have to fear. There's 365 verses in the Bible, one for every day of the year, telling us not to fear. For God has not given you the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. And I tell people that when you look at the most damaging thing for your life, it's learned helplessness. And we talked about this in the panel already, but in our effort to protect society, I agree with Del. We did a lot of collateral damage to people. They weren't allowed to go to beaches. They weren't allowed to avoid mask wearing alone in their cars. Just absolute lunacy. And I think that the biggest issue that we missed on the pandemic is we isolated all our children. I had an 8-year-old that tried to hang himself in my hospital. And that's because they're not around their peers, they're not around their friends, they're not outside playing like we all did, going to the creek and catching things like that. And I think that when we realize that loneliness and isolation are equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, are we surprised that the rates of domestic violence were high, of rape, of drug abuse? Why did we keep the churches closed, but the dispensaries were open? And
so was McDonald's.
Those were essential services, but church is not?
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Well, and I want to just point out that, I saw, post during COVID, Jesus would get this vaccine. I was so shocked by that because if I remember correctly, Jesus went out and touched lepers with his bare hands and had no concern whatsoever. Jesus didn't wear a mask. Jesus didn't protect himself. Jesus said, walk out on the water. If you have the faith of the grain of a mustard seed, you will move mountains. Folks, so many of us did not move mountains. We were afraid. And they continue as long as they win this game of fear against us. That is Satan in action. That is the serpent. Look at their symbol, that serpent wrapped around the tree with the wings. The medical establishment is here to make you afraid. As long as you are afraid, you do not have life. Eden is nowhere near within your grasp. You have got to recognize that God is in you, that Jesus is moving through you, that your life is pure, and that your faith does make you whole.
Amen. I want to bring in Dr. Tim since we only have a few minutes. Go ahead. That's powerful.
Well,
He's quoting scripture. He's on fire.
Absolutely powerful. I totally agree with you, Del. And I think that we need to come back to Eden. And I think that's the vision and dream that God has for us, to go back to the way things were in the beginning. Adam and Eve didn't look at screens, right? Their television was the animals. And we need to be in nature. And I appreciate what some societies are doing, like Japan is creating forests. They do forest bathing in their cities. I appreciate these community gardens. People shouldn't be, there's some places where it's illegal to grow your own food. We need to incentivize people to grow their own food, to go back to Eden. We need to allow people to be outdoors more. We need to put more skylights in buildings, get that sunshine. I mean, we weren't designed to be inside. I mean, I enjoy just walking on the green grass with my bare feet. I think that's the way Adam and Eve did it. And I think that's the way we should do it as well, to try to come back to that original diet that they were given. We eat all this highly processed food. None of their food had all these ingredients. If you can't recognize the ingredients on that, you shouldn't be eating it. In fact, I would even go so far to say is...
That's actually a really good rule of thumb.
Yeah, you shouldn't put something in your hair, on your skin, unless you can recognize all those ingredients, because you're absorbing that into your body.
And if there are two people on this stage that have wonderful hair, it is Del Bigtree and it is Tim Reisberger. Before he ends up going off, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that we have to get back to is, the understanding is there. What we've got to get away from is believing that the answer is outside of ourselves. Our answer is in our connection, our intuition, our connection to God, our connection to Christ. If you sit and pray and ask yourself, how am I supposed to feed my kids? I guarantee you the message coming to you through God and Jesus is not go out and buy the brightest colored Fruit Loops you can find.
Exactly.
It's going to say, what did Eden look like? What was there? There was whole plants, whole animals, whole foods. Beyond just, can I recognize it? Are there less than 3 or 4 ingredients in what I'm eating? If there are more than that, then there's something wrong here. It is so simple. Let's get back to who we were, what our ancestors were raised on. Even just decades ago, we were not this sick. We shouldn't take Robert Kennedy Jr. clearing the crap off of our shelves. Sorry for my language.
I was about to say, we try to be as clean as possible.
Yes.
With that, I think we're going to have to let you go, Dr. Tim. Is there any final thing you want to say before we have to let you go?
Jesus would make a decision for health. I don't believe he would have taken something in his body that is harmful, because Jesus says, I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly.
Amen, everyone. Dr. Tim Reisberger. All right, our next doctor that we are bringing out is Dr. Samuel Perez, who is a neuroscientist receiving his doctoral degrees at Loma Linda University, specializing in bidirectional interactions between the nervous systems and circulating immune cells, and also working with brain plasticity and cellular reorganization of the brain cells. All right, we need to shake his hand, I'm afraid. Dr. Perez, thank you for being here.
A pleasure. I'm so inspired. Please give it up.
So here we go. Let's just dive right into it, Dr. Perez. From everything you've heard so far, in your expertise, what is fundamentally going wrong, not just in America, but in the Christian faith, in our diets and everything else? What do you think? If you have to throw a target, if you have to throw a dart and hit a bullseye, what is the biggest problem we're dealing with here?
What a loaded question.
We love to ask them here at the Battle for Your Frontal Lobe.
From my perspective, it's in front of us. We are ignoring the principles that God gave his people in ancient times. I'm gonna give you an example. The topic that we shared with you on Thursday was not in my mind until one Friday before being invited to speak.
Could you remind them what the topic was?
It was one synapse at a time, bringing health to the brain one
That's
synapse
right.
at a time. So we were reductionists in the sense that we brought it to the synapse, which is the cellular connection. You know, and we were talking about how science is skewing that evidence. Because it's easy to ask a biochemist, well, this molecule goes in here. How can you show that there's a pathway? I can show you a different pathway because the pharmaceuticals are trying to reinvent the cell, the mechanisms by which the cells work. So the topic came to me after I prayed, and I say, God, we're going to visit my in-laws. We need a message. Which one is it? Tell me. In 30 minutes, I put that presentation together, which we share with you all. In other words, we have the answer in that vertical connection with everybody else in mind, not our own. And when we have that cross with Him and with the benefits of everybody else, every single person here, I'm sure you can learn something. So be curious, ask God, and He will give you something to tell somebody else, and that's what it's lacking in our country right now. The truth. We need to be seekers of truth. The truth has been polluted and obscured, and that is a problem. We are not living in truth in our country right now.
So I'm going to take it back to Del Bigtree. It seems we keep hitting on truth. Truth. What is truth? When Jesus was before Pilate, Pilate would ask him that famous question, what is truth? But he turned away before he ever got the answer. Is America hungry for truth today in a way that they haven't been for the past few decades?
I think it is. I mean, for sure. One of the things I've been saying to reporters right before the election took place, and I had spent 2.5 years as communications director for Robert Kennedy Jr., but I said to the reporters, they said, you know, is Robert Kennedy Jr. going to make a difference? I said, if I stop someone on the street right now and ask who's the current HHS secretary in the United States of America, 1,000 of them, how many people would be able to answer that question? Every reporter said, probably 0. I said, if I stop them on the street and say, who's about to be HHS secretary? And I said, how many people say Robert Kennedy Jr.? And they said, a lot. And I said, we just removed red dye number 3 before Robert Kennedy Jr. even got the job. 2 weeks before he even got the job, they suddenly, after 10 years of knowing that it was carcinogenic and had all sorts of issues, why all of a sudden? Because Robert Kennedy Jr. was coming. It's not that he's some giant hero. He's not a knight in shining armor. It's because we, the people, are paying attention. We, the people, are making demands. We, the parents, are saying, no more, not in our food, not now. We're finally watching what's taking place.
And if I recall, also beef tallow was, I believe, put into Shake and Shack's things
That's
very
a
early
great-
on in
it's
the
a great
administration.
stat.
Which means I would like to
Yeah.
pivot back to Dr. Perez, because now it seems like we're talking about the nutrition, what's actually in the food. What can you tell us about what's going on?
So my research was in the interaction between the nervous system and the immune system. It happens that our immune system interacts with the sympathetic arm of the nervous system. Now, by middle age, so about an equivalent, this was studies in rats, and lab rats, but the equivalent of middle age, let's say 35, 40 to 50, the nerve system prunes itself. And so the approach was, oh my goodness, so that means that aging is a disease? That we can age well? No. 10 years later, when I was defending my thesis, I realized, hey, we're becoming more efficient. It's like a second pruning. The first one happens
It's
in
like
the
Doge for the body.
Yeah, pretty much. So the first pruning, that's right. Yeah, the first pruning happens early in life, and it's said that autistic children have an overwiring of the brain, to put it just globally. The second pruning happens in middle age, and that is okay. But now our job is to maintain it. So I think the challenge for us as Americans and in the world is to be more efficient at maintaining and helping our immune system, because our immune system, if treated well, is capable of fending disease and chronic and cancer above all things because of the environmental contamination that we experience. It's able to carry us through. Now, how long we live is up to God, but our immune system is capable of that if we treat it well. And I can name how to do it. I mean, IR, walking on the grass, daily devotion, nutrition. The best studies, and I want to bring this thing about the studies. When scientists isolate one nutrient, let's say omega fatty acids, which it was very, very popular 15 years ago, the studies that came out, that help the brain, you know, the wirings and the myelin and the maintenance of the brain, of the cells. If they isolate one nutrient versus a holistic regime, you know, that we studied. I was at the University of Illinois, and I came up with this hypothesis. Thanks to Ellen G. White, because I thought, you know, maybe we should try a combination of nutrients, omega fatty acids, vitamin D, which is fat soluble, maybe other choline, all right, to help, and one antioxidant that became famous. You guys want to guess what that was? Quercetin. Quercetin. My paper got a lot of hits because we study quercetin, but in a diet and with other nutrients. So the studies that put a group of nutrients versus one in isolation are better than those that just claim, oh look, this one thing makes a difference. That tells you that whole foods and in combination is the way to go. And that helps the immune system, it helps the inflammatory processes in the brain when we exert for learning, for remembering. And in the long run, I mean, the mice that were on those diets performed like the young ones, and we were puzzled. But we better believe that. So more studies need to be done. And that is what we learned by my experience, that we need to validate that our immune system, like you said, we need to trust it, we need to treat it well. Not with pharmaceuticals, but with the raw materials that we have available.
So I want to pivot it back to Del Bigtree, because there was something interesting you said there in terms of the fact that for these studies that we need to have more of them. But as you were hitting on earlier, it's very hard to do any of these studies because it just seems the funding isn't there.
Well, the funding's there. It just depends on where it's coming from. We have to decide to have our regulatory agencies. Imagine if we actually cleaned up our food supply. Can you imagine if our schools, for instance, our school lunch program actually put whole foods in front of every child instead of the Fritos and the corn chips and the Coca-Colas and all of these things? We're destroying their health. We're spending $4.5 trillion a year dealing with the sickness we're creating, but we won't invest. They'll say, well, can you imagine if we tried to say whole foods in every school across America? Well, the Republicans might say, well, that's a lot of money. Who wants to spend that? That's going to be billions and billions of dollars. Well, if we don't invest there, then we pay it 100 times down the road. This is where we've got to get back to being reasonable and logical about how we see this world. We've got to make the changes now. We've got to clean up our house. It's time for a spring cleaning in the United States of America. And we've got to remember why we're here. We've got to remember why we're the greatest nation in the world. It's because we're the only nation that says that your rights are not given to you by your government. They're endowed to you by what? By God. By God, I'm endowed with rights. And our Constitution only sets a set of laws on what the government has to do and what it's allowed to do when it tries to come upon my rights. We have lost our way. We have people walking through this country that actually believe that that Constitution is governing me. It's governing my government. They are my dog. They are on my leash. They work for me, not vice versa. And why is that important? Because just like you're talking, we are cells of this great body. We are all a cell. We are all needed, every one of us. The heart cell has got to run that heart. The lung has to run the lung. But we're being taught that you don't actually matter. The good of the whole, a communistic perspective. Forget about your own individuality. Your individuality is what is about you that is created in the image and likeness of God. That if you stand in who you are, if you stand for what you are, as an individual, we are stronger as a whole. We are a stronger body when we stand for ourselves. We've got to recognize our power right now. We've got to express our power. The entire system is trying to tell you should be scared. It is trying to tell you that you are sick. It is trying to tell you that you are divided. It is trying to tell you you should worry about everybody else and not yourself. Put your mask on yourself, as they say in the airplane, before you worry about somebody else. Make yourself whole. Make yourself strong. Recognize your God-given power now. It is our time.
So with that, I want to let's